What's up, guys? This is Jeff Messina here. I'm going to tell you guys some stories about Saul and then tell you about his legacy and what he meant to me and what he did to help shape me and many others. But let's get to it's a terrible thing when someone passes when they're way too young. But let's now share his legacy and the funny stories and the great stories so you guys can know a little bit more about the side of Saul that I saw and I experienced. Is going to be different than maybe some of y'all because it was a long time ago, and I know you guys all love him and would love to hear some stories. So here we go. I'm gonna have to talk a little bit with myself too, just to put some stuff in context. So I started my martial arts training with Saul when it was way before Metro. It was called Patum Wadi Gym, which was a crazy long name. It was a Thai boxing name, which I think meant flower blossom, and it might have been Krupong School or where Krupong trained when he lived in Thailand. But everyone just called it Saul's because Patum Wadi was hard to say and write and all that, so it was just called Saul's. I started with Saul December of 1997, and I trained with Saul from 1997 to 2004, a little before we opened until we opened Revolution. All right, I found Saul in the phone book, guys. This was before internet was well known, and I know for certain that Saul didn't have a website for a number of years. If as far as I remember, I don't think he ever had a website when I was there. So I just walk in the gym, and at the time he had a boxing ring, and that's where we grappled, and it was a rough-ass canvas floor. And I show up, and I remember AJ being there, and I think Walter, this guy named Shane, and man, I forgot this other dude's name, but he looked like a skinhead, and he wasn't, or he was formerly a skinhead. You guys know who I'm talking about. Big dude, tats, looked mean, but was really chill. So I'm like, I want to do this. What do you want to do? And like, we're just gonna roll. So it was just like all these guys just beat the crap out of me in this boxing ring. And I don't think there was anything taught for several classes or weeks. But Saul, at that time, had, a little before, just won the Dungal, and he was like actively training with us a lot. It was nice, and Saul was a beast, man. Like super well-rounded at everything, and way before all the leg lock craze, Saul was super good at heel hooks and toe holds and knee bars, and just pretty good at everything. And that goes to like show how all his fighters are. They're very well-rounded and tough. So okay, fast forward. Let's get to the stories. Some of the ones that always stick out in my mind. One time, very similar to a couple of these stories, but I was like packed up, ready to go to leave from a jiu-jitsu class, and I have no idea who this dude was. Maybe someone can identify it now. This guy came in, and it was just in jiu-jitsu, and was beating like a lot of the students. So Saul, seemed like back then Saul would just wear jean shorts like every day. So Saul's like, Saul wanted to train with him, right? Saul was always that dude that if somebody as tough is coming in, he was going to show them who was boss, if we couldn't do it back then. And I got a lot of that from him. No one's going to come at the gym and run through my guys. All right. So it seemed like a normal guy from what I remember. He didn't seem rude or anything, but he was beating everybody. Saul went in there, took his shirt off in his jean shorts, put down, I think, a platter of Long John Silvers. He used to always have Long John Silvers in the gym. For what I remember, like hook sweep, like a butterfly guard sweep, wham, got him out and started like palm striking this dude in the face. Wham, wham. I was just like, oh my God, what's he doing? I didn't think we could really do that. Saul basically beat the shit out of this guy. Never saw that dude again. Very similar story. This was a few years later, but it was with there were guys who were kickboxing, were sparring, and this guy seemed like he was, from my memory, he wasn't rude, but it was kind of like handling everybody pretty good. So Saul's like, oh, let's me and you do one. The guy's like, oh, sir, I'm tired. I'm like, no, you leave when I tell you to leave. So the first round, the guy was pretty good too. And then the first round, Saul was beating on him pretty good. The guy was like being respectful, but was still would catch Saul a little bit here and there. And then toward the end, Saul was like really laying it onto him. boom, like I remember he got him with an uppercut and his guy's headgear got over his face, and Saul started like just jacking this dude up, right? So between rounds, the guy's like, I've had enough. And he's like, fuck no, you haven't. You're not done yet. I was like, oh shit. And then the second round came out. I was sitting right on the skirt of the ring or watching, and Saul threw a leg kick, and that guy checked it and broke Saul's shin. Not like Anderson Silva, but he had to have, I think, like an air cast for a little while. I was like, oh fuck. I couldn't believe that happened. But that was Saul, you know. Sometimes I'd show up there at the gym, and he'd be like, all right, Jeff, you and him, Vale Tudo, which is, if you guys didn't know, that was MMA, no gloves and all that. And I was the young 22-year-old guy that wanted to show my coach I was tough and be like him. You just make us fight, you know, and to just beat the crap out of these dudes or whatever. And come to find out, it was just some guy that Saul thought was a turd. Saul didn't like. So much stuff. You never knew what would happen. You get a call on a Sunday from Saul. Like, I helped Saul a little bit. I used to be a music promoter, and I helped him with some relationships to get Renegade started when he started in a hotel, and then we did it at the engine room, and we did all these things. But on Sunday, if you got a call from Saul to come to the gym for some training, you weren't training. You were going to be putting the cage together or taking it apart. Saul was a loving guy, but he was a hard ass. Okay, I remember sitting with him. He had somebody at the Naomi gym. There was 2 rooms, and he would always change it around. He would sometimes have the boxing ring in the back and the boxing ring in the front, jiu-jitsu mats in the back, and vice versa. And I remember more than a couple times, if there was someone he really didn't respect or didn't care that much for, he'd put him on this little tire, and you'd bounce on the tire to practice like your weight transfer for boxing. And we would just be chilling in the other room, and you could hear that tire squeak, and that fucking tire would stop. Hey, get back on the fucking tire, you dirtbag, or something like that. And it might even have been a lady, you know, someone he just didn't really want to coach or whatever. And he'd be in the other room, and he'd hear that tire stop, and he'd scream at them, you know. I remember he had a guy he was training for fights. I'm not going to say his name, but he did a little time in the pen, and he had like he was strong looking, but he wasn't that strong here, at least then, you know. And he was getting handled pretty bad in training, and Saul was just like, you know, just cussing him out. What are those muscles for? Those muscles ain't for shit. It's for your boyfriend in the pen. And just like clowning on him, you know. And that's kind of how he was, you know. He would make us push him in his truck and then like slam the brakes on us, and it was like he was a tough trainer, and he was way ahead of his time, you know. He built cages. He had a cage around the fence that was like a chain link fence cage, so it was more for looks because you really weren't hitting the cage, but you would hit the cage sometimes, and he would cut the shit out of you. Then he would fabricate cages. He used to make it's like a Tony Blauer suit, if you guys know what that is. It's like a self-defense suit where you could like punch him in the face real hard, and it was like I think like a football helmet, and he had duct tape all over it and a full body suit. And he would sometimes teach women self-defense, or he'd have, you know, he'd be training MMA guys. He'd let everyone lay into him. But man, like, if you were anybody in the scene, really even up to today, you've crossed paths with Saul. You either trained with him, or your coach did, or you fought and probably lost to one of his guys. I hated, you know, many years later, I opened my own gym, and I really didn't want to fight any of these guys, mostly out of respect to Saul, but I knew they were going to be a handful, and guys that would never quit and that were really tough, well-rounded fighters, because that's what Saul produced. If it wasn't for Saul, I mean, who knows what I would be. You know, I went to Saul when I was 22 years old in college with a little baby, and just looking to train, you know. And Saul was my idol, and to me, he was Hickson Gracie, he was Bruce Lee, he was the guy that I looked to learn from, and just a great friend and mentor, you know. And so many people that are important to me this day I met from Saul, like AJ, Anthony Johnson, Yves Edwards, Tim Crater, Mike Jackson, Big Toe Mike Jackson, many more. And man, if you were anybody in the world of MMA, you know, I met the craziest people or the best people in the world at that time. You know, Rico Rodriguez was training with Saul and with us at the gym a lot from before the UFC, through the UFC, and through Rico. We got to see like Mark Coleman and Mark Kerr and Kevin Randleman in there. And then Saul went on for years developing guys from day one to the UFC. So, and always, I mean, to new guys like Adrian Yanez and Jacob Silva and all these great fighters that he was able to develop from scratch or from very little training, you know. And he was always very, very intuitive on how to use the cage, and like he was doing stuff like CrossFit style workouts just coming up with him. He was a genius, like before anyone would do this stuff, and he was a genius at like putting together game plans and things like that. And me and Saul, like I knew Saul since 1997. We talked pretty regularly, man. He could be a hard ass and always tell the truth, but this dude showed me nothing but love. And I'm gonna miss him. Never forget him. And oh yeah, Bart. I cannot think about Saul without thinking about Bart. Mike Altman too. And all these people he touched. And I love you, man. I miss you. This is just such a small piece of what he's done. And I just wanted to say something and tell some of the stories. I know that there's a whole lot more. And I'll do a part 2. Because he definitely deserves as much attention and glory given to him as possible. But man, Saul and Tatoy and O'Neal, man, I love this dude. Houston loved this guy. The world loved this guy. And his lessons and his legacy will lead on forever. All right, guys. Bye.